Okay, continuing on in our edTPA journey, the next set of slides is going to walk you through the planning rubrics, the literacy planning rubrics for task one. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to teach you about the rubrics from the scorer's perspective so that you can get a good sense of what somebody is looking for as they're grading your edTPA. And I'm just going to start by saying, while those edTPA rubrics are good as a guide, they're very confusing and they're unclear without good clarification. So the document that I actually suggest that you take a look at, and the one that I'm going to be using in this talk, is this, the Understanding Rubric Level Progressions document. And we're on version 1 still, which is good. And it actually breaks down exactly what you have to do on each of the rubrics. So that's the document I'm going to toggle back and forth between. So we're going to look at the first 5 rubrics of the edTPA for elementary education, and this is what makes up task number 1. So you've got these 5 rubrics here, and we will go one by one through them, starting with rubric number 1. So what you've got to do is open up the commentary and have the Understanding Rubric Level Progression document available. And this bright yellow highlight is not part of the commentary document, but it's a reminder to you that this sample commentary is meant to be just a reference for this undergrad methods course. Copying responses may result in plagiarism detection. So just know that when you are submitting your edTPA, if you're too close to what's written in this sample, it could get flagged for plagiarism. The first thing they do when you submit is run it through plagiarism detection software, and they run it against every single edTPA that's been submitted. So if you find one online, if you've got a good friend who submitted previously and did well, or you open up this sample and you copy it too closely, you could get flagged for plagiarism. And we've had students in the past who get called on this, and it just invalidates your entire edTPA. So don't do that. My suggestion to you all is to open this, watch this video, read the sample, and then walk away from your computer for at least an hour. Then come back and don't open the sample again. Sit down and write without looking at the sample to the prompt based on what I said, and then go back and read the sample again and work in to your writing things that you want to revise and improve. If you sit down and type your own answers with this sample commentary, your brain is going to think of no other way to say the same thing. So your best bet is to watch this video, read the sample, and then walk away for a while and write it with that in mind, but not with it open. Otherwise, you're just going to be way too close. And we're going to be looking in this final project for any writing that's too close to the sample. And I do realize and recognize how hard it can be. Okay, so another thing I want you to have open is the summary score sheet. And something that we're going to do is stop to give each rubric a score for this sample. And so I'm going to train you in how to score based on what I learned as a scorer in the training. And then we're going to talk about why this edTPA would score the way that it did. So underneath the student needs, you can write something here about how the students in this class have IEPs for ELA, which include test accommodations, directions read aloud, extended time and a half on assessments, all of those things that came from that table in the context for learning, directions repeated, paraphrased, extra wait time, written work submitted orally, dictated, or word processed. Those are the things that I make note of when I'm scoring, because those are the things that need to be addressed all throughout in the supports. This person also had below grade level readers, so they used guided reading and frequent formative assessments to help the student. So you can make a note of that right now. The central focus is reading comprehension. The essential literacy strategy is synthesizing. The related skills you're going to find out in just a moment. and then we'll fill in the language function. We also know at this point that lesson 1 introduced and modeled the synthesizing strategy using a graphic organizer and using the text of Freedom Riders. You can put a little bit there. Students were expected to watch as the teacher modeled and were given an exit ticket, 3 out of 4, considered mastery, to assess simply that they knew what the strategy synthesize was. Lesson 2, we now know, was a reminder of the synthesis strategy, a whole class guided application of that strategy in the whole group setting, where the students filled in their own parts and the teacher was there to help and support them, and they did turn and talk, and they did lots of supported work through that. We know that the below grade level readers and the students with IEPs were given lots of help with the graphic organizer. They were also given that vocabulary bookmark and the checklist in order to write the paragraph. And we also can repeat that for lesson 3, where we saw the independent application. The teacher still read the text aloud, and the students were asked to independently do the graphic organizer and synthesis paragraph, and the same supports were provided. For the assessments, we had an exit ticket, and the rubric was introduced. Lesson 2, we had the rubric as an informal assessment, checking that the students as a group were able to complete the task and follow the rubric. And then on day 3, we saw independent application, and they were looking for a 10 out of 12 on that rubric to show mastery. So you should fill this in with your notes. I'll show you the completed score sheet when I'm done. But that's how I start every rubric, every edTPA scoring. And it's really, what are those student needs? She had a lot of student needs in this class, and we want to just remember those students. Okay, so that's everything you need to have open as you're thinking about scoring this edTPA. So for rubric 1, rubric 1's essential question is, how do the candidates' plans build students' understanding of an essential literacy strategy, synthesizing, for, in this case, comprehending text, and the skills that support that strategy? So you can see this rubric makes you initially think, oh, this is simple how I'm getting graded. This isn't too bad. I can look at the level 5. Do my plans build an authentic connection between reading and writing? Yeah, I think so. I'm doing that. Am I explaining how I will use the learning tasks to lead students independently to apply the essential literacy strategy and the related skills? I'm doing that. You might immediately think, oh, this is easy. I can do this. But let me just tell you, it is not easy. There is coded language in there that I'm going to break down for you that makes the edTPA really difficult. And there's so much in this that is not explained in the rubric, but it is explained in the understanding rubric level progressions document. So this is just the quick snapshot. I'm actually going to drill down with you into all of the rubrics and explain to you what it means. So for rubric number 1, the guiding question is repeated here. You can see some key concepts here. The word aligned appears. They want to see that your standards, your objectives, your strategies, and your learning tasks are all aligned. And that means if you picked a strategy like summarize, you're not picking an ELA standard for making inferences, because those two things don't match up. So that's the first thing that you need to have in alignment. And then if you're teaching them to synthesize, we don't see in your lesson a whole segment on punctuating sentences. That wouldn't align. So you're teaching your standards, your objectives that you write, all of it is aligned. That's something that we've worked a great deal on in our Inch 390 class. So alignment hopefully is not an issue. They're also looking for significant content inaccuracies. If you just have something wrong, if you say that the civil rights movement was in the 1990s, that's going to be a content inaccuracy. So do you have everything correct? Are there flaws in your content? Beyond that, there's some literacy terms that are central to the edTPA. These things you should know by this point. The essential literacy strategy. This is the cornerstone of the edTPA. It's a deliberately selected approach by a reader or writer to either comprehend or compose. All of you are doing comprehension. When students are able to select these strategies, they achieve independence in their literacy work. And here's some examples: summarizing, retelling, comparing and contrasting, comparing accounts of the same event, using evidence to predict, interpreting characters' feelings, drawing conclusions, etc., etc. You all have chosen an essential literacy strategy. The literacy skills, these are the related skills needed for reading and writing, include, and they list off a bunch of things. You're going to use your related skills that you developed from your essential literacy strategy. Meaningful context. This is the part on rubric 1 that frustrates everybody. A meaningful context in the context of the edTPA is use of literacy in students' everyday lives, or texts that reflect the experiences and interests of your particular students. So for example, if you have a graphic organizer with sentence frames that you're using to teach them how to write in an expository text, that has to be done to an authentic audience in order to be considered in a meaningful context. So if you are creating a meaningful context in the edTPA, they've got to be like writing to an actual governor about a problem that they have, or they've got to be reading something that they have a vested interest in. They have told you at some point they're interested in this, and you just took that interest and ran with it, and you developed your whole edTPA around something that they were interested in. They had an authentic audience for. It is very uncommon to actually have a meaningful context for your edTPA. So I just want you to let that one go. In fact, let me explain how scoring training works on the edTPA, and maybe it will help you to let some things go. When your scorer was trained on the edTPA, they were told, as I was, that we all start on a level 3. So everyone starts at a level 3. And then you either go up to a level 4 if you've done something exceptional or you've done extremely well, or you go down to a level 2 if you're not quite there at that level 3. A level 1 is really designated for folks who really miss the mark or who forget that they have to talk about their students with varying learning needs, your students with IEPs, your English language learners, or your below grade level readers. Wherever you see that box that says, don't forget to talk about your various learning needs, if you forget, you get an automatic 1. No matter how great or meaningful and amazing your lessons are, you will get a level 1 if you don't do that thing. Let's talk about level 5, the dreaded level 5. I just want all of you to let go of level 5. As a scorer, I think I have maybe given 2 level 5s in my entire scoring career. It's just, the expectation is that a novice candidate is just not going to be at a level 5. I don't even know why they include the level 5, honestly. Everyone who does really well on the edTPA comes in at a 3. Level 5 is like above and beyond. You really sound like a veteran teacher who's been doing it for years. You're just thinking of planning in a whole different way. All of your lessons are organically created from the needs and the interests and the desires of your students. It's almost like you don't have a curriculum to follow. You can just do whatever you want. And it's all meaningful, and every assessment you've planned is meaningful and organically planned. It just doesn't happen, especially not in your student teaching. You don't have that kind of control. Typically, your classroom teacher is going to say, okay, our next unit is on summarizing, and you're going to teach those lessons, and you're going to use this book. You don't really get that opportunity in student teaching. So I just let go of the level 5. Very rarely does anyone even get a level 5. Most of you are going to score either a 2 or a 3 on all of your rubrics, and you need an average of, I think it's like 2.7 or 8 in order to pass the whole entire edTPA. So if you get a balance of 2s and 3s and you're heavier on the 3s, you're great, you're gonna pass. If you get a whole bunch of 3s and maybe 1, 2, and maybe a 4, you're probably gonna pass very easily. So just let go of the 5. It's hard for people. People have a hard time letting go of the 5, but just let it go. All right, so let's take a very close look at rubric 1. So the way you use this document is you see up here in this brownish box, the source of evidence. So the source of evidence for this is the context for learning, which we have already reviewed for this student, and the planning commentary prompt number 1. So we're going to look at that. And then a strategic review of the lesson plans and instructional materials. We've already done that. We looked at the students' lessons. We know they're doing the gradual release model for synthesize. They've got graphic organizers, sentence frames, anchor charts, vocabulary cards. We've seen it all. We've looked at the assessments and everything. So now the only thing left is to take a look at planning commentary number 1. And then we'll look at unpacking the rubric levels. So let's go over to planning commentary and take a look at number 1. So number 1 is the central focus question. And I'd like you to stop right now and read everything in number 1, which includes 1A, 1B, and 1C. So this much writing. And this is really focused on what's your central focus? And you can see in here the student lists the central focus, the essential literacy strategy, the related skills. How are your standards and learning objectives addressing your essential strategy, your related skills, and the reading and writing connections? And then how do your plans build on each other to help your students make connections? So stop this video right now and read the sample students' responses. Okay, once you've read the responses, come on back and let's go through, and we're going to take a look at the unpacking rubric level progressions. Notice that even this document doesn't start at a 5. It starts at a 3. Just like I said, your trainer starts at a level 3, or your score starts at a level 3. So this one does have an automatic 1 if you have content inaccuracies or your lessons have misalignment in the way that I explained up above. You will score an automatic 1. This is not one of those ones where you have to talk about your IEPs and your 504s and all of that. So there's no auto 1 for that. But if anything is inaccurate or misaligned, you will get a 1. So let's take a look at the level 3. On a level 3 for rubric 1, your plans are logically sequenced to facilitate students' learning of the essential strategy for, in this case, comprehending. They are presented in a sequence in which each lesson builds on the previous, and the sequencing of the plan supports the students' learning by connecting conventions or skills to the essential strategy. So your related skills are connected to your strategy. And these connections are explicitly explained in your commentary, and how those connections are made are not left up to the scorer to decide. So you have done a really good job of explaining how you're teaching the strategy and the skills, and how you're supporting your students' learning of those two things happening, not just the strategy. And then at a level 3, you will identify how a central focus on something related to composition or comprehension, in this case, comprehension. You might be a little bit vague about the distinction in the commentary between the skills and the strategy, but at a level 3, your lesson plans, have standards and objectives and tasks that support both your strategy and your related skills. Okay, so that's a level 3. And if you look at the sample student, you will see that their essential literacy strategy is clearly explained as synthesizing. The related skills are locating key details and adding to those details and those facts to what they already know, and then they're going to synthesize. For this response, this answer, part B here, is super complicated because this is one of those where you've got to pay attention to all the little things. You have to describe how the standards and your learning objectives address 3 different things. So the best way to structure this response is how this student did it. Given the central focus of reading comprehension, the standard for ELA that I selected is, and then they literally cut and paste the standard. This standard will address the essential literacy strategy of synthesizing because anything that you see in the sample in bold is meant to be a sentence frame that you are allowed to copy. This will not get flagged for plagiarism. If it's in bold, it's meant for you to be borrowing, and it's the structure for how you should respond. So this standard addresses the strategy of synthesizing because the standard requires students in grade 5 to be able to locate key details, explain how they support a central idea, and those are skills that are similar to synthesizing. So summarizing is related to synthesizing. The lesson asks students to locate key details and add them to their prior knowledge, the related skills, through the process of synthesizing the essential strategy. So notice, this student did not leave anything up to the imagination of the scorer. They are explicitly saying, my lesson asks the students to locate the key details, add them to their prior knowledge, the related skills, through that process of synthesizing. This aligns to the social studies standard, which I chose right here in civics, citizenship, and blah, blah, blah. So they're going to learn about the social studies standard through the lens of literacy. The learning objective for lesson 1 is, you can cut and paste that into your lesson plan, and then here's cut and paste from lesson 1. Here is the learning objective for lesson 2. You can see that it is cut and pasted right here. And it says all elements of this lesson will be planned according to the New York State standards and the learning objective. This particular objective ensures that students will understand what synthesizing and key details are. The learning objective also checks for students' understandings of the selected vocabulary words. And then we see lesson 2 is, this is all about lesson 1 here. And this is all about lesson 2. So you can see the structure is, the learning objective is, and it's connected to the standards and to the strategy and related skills in this way. Everything is structured out super clearly. Here's the learning objective for lesson 3. And then the last bit, you've got to talk about how it is addressing reading and writing, your whole learning segment. So they're asked to locate key details in this text. They're going to combine that with their prior knowledge, and they're going to write a paragraph to explain how their perspective has changed. This is synthesis. They're going to combine what they read with their prior knowledge, write a synthesized paragraph, the essential strategy, in order to show that they have comprehended, which is the central focus. So it's super wordy, it's super explicit. You're just copying and pasting the standards, the learning objectives, but it's hitting all of the necessary bullets. You've got to talk about the standards, so you got to list them. You've got to talk about your learning objectives, so you have to list them. You have to talk about how all of those things are addressing all of these things. So if you follow this frame and the bolded text in this response, you'll be in the right zone for this. And we can clearly see that everything is aligned. This question is getting at the alignment of your lesson plans. Is everything aligned in a way that's logical? As a scorer, I can look at this and say, yes, everything is aligned. So this would not get an automatic 1. The next question is, how do your plans build on each other to help students make connections between the strategy and your related skills? And then they threw in this part in the meaningful context. So remember I said, Meaningful context has to be something that has organically developed from your students and their interests or their very specific needs, or you're doing some sort of authentic writing piece or an authentic project where they're working out in the community or something like that. That would be meaningful context. So this is how this one gets structured. These lesson plans help the students to make connections between the strategy of synthesizing and the related skills of locating key details and using prior knowledge, because, and then you have to go on to explain. It's not enough to say that it does. That would just be identifying. You have to explain. So you need that word, because the strategy is broken down into the two related skills, which they put together to synthesize. They're going to have the strategy modeled. So now this is walking through the 3-lesson sequence. This is why we have you use the gradual release of responsibility, because that model naturally has your plans build on each other to help your students make connections. So here, where I have it highlighted, you have to explain how you start with modeling. You're going to teach them the related skills. You're going to show them how to use the strategy to synthesize to meet the standard. Then they get the chance to practice it in lesson 2. And then after they practice it and get a little feedback from you, they're going to try it on their own in lesson 3. So naturally your lessons will build. These lessons build on one another because they use the gradual release of responsibility. Just call it what it is. The lessons are embedded in a broader unit about civil rights. So this is the attempt to talk about how this is meaningful context. They're embedded in a broader unit of civil rights and activism, a topic that 5th graders are eager to learn about. This set helps them to understand how African Americans specifically have fought for freedom. The purposeful application in this meaningful context will help them gain practice. Really, that's not an authentic environment. That's not a meaningful context in the definition of the edTPA. So this lesson would not be meeting the edTPA's requirement for meaningful context. Okay, so back to the rubric. I can see that all of these have been met. There's a logical sequence, the plans build, the connections between reading and writing are explicitly stated, and the connections between the students' related skills and strategy use are explicitly spelled out. And the candidate is able to identify the strategy and skills and distinction. And the lesson plans have standards and objectives that support both the strategy and the skills. That is happening. So below a level 3, you can see there would be little or no planned instruction to develop or apply the strategies. Maybe paying some attention to helping the students with the conventions, but you're not really connected. The strategy and the skills are not super connected. Your central focus is vague. The skills are not well explained. The lesson plans have objectives that support only the skills or only the strategy. So there's just weak connections across the board. I'm going to go to above a level 3. So above a level 3, the learning tasks are making consistent connections between the strategy and the skills. I would say our sample is at a level 4 for this. And the consistent connections require students to routinely apply the strategy. This is sounding good. I like this. There's a clear central focus. They're explicit about the central focus and the related skills. They're connecting in a meaningful context. Here's where that meaningful context comes in. And they have some examples. Are they using literacy in their everyday lives? Are they writing thank you notes to actual people who exist? Are they picking texts that reflect their interests as you know them? Are they getting to choose their own topic? The answer is no to all of those. This cannot score at a level 4. So this would be a level 3. So if you're giving this student a score, it should be at a level 3 because this is not within a meaningful context. And that's the note I would make as the scorer. No meaningful context. So you can go ahead and make that note as well. So on each of the rubric slides, I have put these what to watch out for boxes, and it's just reminders of what you see in that understanding rubric level progressions document. So your plans have to be logically sequenced. Your standards must align to your instruction and objectives. Clearly teach the related skills across all 3 of your lessons. And at a level 4, you're going to touch on them in every lesson. Most people are going to get a 3 unless you have a rare, meaningful context. And I've never given a 5 on this rubric, not ever. I didn't even look at the level 5. We're not even going to look at it. Just ignore it. Let it go. Just let the level 5 go. Okay, so that is rubric number 1. It is one of the more complicated ones on the edTPA. It's based on that prompt number 1. So that is rubric 1. If you want to give it a go on your own, you now have the skills that you need to try rubric 1.